Before we begin, please be advised that this story contains themes of psychological suspense, mystery, and unresolved past events that some listeners may find intense. Listener discretion is advised. The scent of cedar and pine needles often brought a strange comfort to Jessica. It was the smell of the cabin, the one her family owned upstate, the one where she'd spent nearly every summer of her childhood. It was also the smell of the woods surrounding Blackwood Lake, a smell that, for 10 years, had been meticulously scrubbed from her memory, along with the chilling echoes of a night that should have remained buried. Tonight, however, the familiar aroma was nothing but a cruel trick of her mind, a phantom scent clinging to the edges of an otherwise perfect evening. She sat on her plush sofa, the muted glow of her smart TV casting a soft light across her meticulously organized living room. Her life finally felt meticulously organized. A successful career in graphic design, a beautiful apartment in the city, a quiet rhythm she'd fought tooth and nail to establish. For years she'd felt like she was constantly looking over her shoulder, but lately that shadow had receded. She'd even started to believe she was truly safe. Then the package arrived. It wasn't a grand, imposing box, just a small, unassuming brown parcel, no larger than a shoebox, left on her doorstep earlier that afternoon. No return address, just her name, handwritten in a looping, almost childish script, stark against the plain label. She'd opened it idly, assuming it was a forgotten delivery, perhaps a belated birthday gift from a distant relative. The initial contents were equally benign. A small, faded photograph. Her breath hitched. It was a picture of the four of them, taken exactly 10 summers ago, on the dock of Blackwood Lake. Michael, grinning, his arm slung around Emily, who was playfully splashing water at David. And there she was, Jessica, perched on the edge, a hesitant smile on her face, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple behind them. They looked so young, so carefree, so utterly oblivious to the precipice they were teetering on. A wave of nausea washed over her. This wasn't a forgotten gift. This was a deliberate, chilling reminder. Beneath the photograph, nestled among layers of crinkled tissue paper, lay a small, tarnished silver locket. It was a cheap, mass-produced thing, the kind you'd buy at a tourist trap, but its significance was monumental. This locket had belonged to Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, the local girl who worked summers at the general store, the girl they'd had that stupid, petty argument with on the dock the night everything changed. Sarah, who had disappeared without a trace later that very same summer. Jessica's fingers trembled as she picked up the locket. It felt impossibly heavy, cold against her skin. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the carefully constructed walls of her mind. The glint of that locket around Sarah's neck as she stormed off into the darkness of the woods, after Michael's cruel taunt had finally pushed her past her breaking point. And then, stuck to the inside of the locket with a piece of old, brittle tape, was the note. It was a single strip of paper, torn from what looked like a composition notebook. The handwriting was the same looping, childish script as on the package. Her eyes scanned the few words, and the air left her lungs in a silent gasp. The lake remembers. And so do I. I know what you did that summer. The words were a physical blow, stripping away 10 years of carefully cultivated peace in an instant. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin feeling clammy and cold. It wasn't a threat of violence, not explicitly, but the implication was far more terrifying. It was a threat of exposure, of truth, of the unraveling of everything she had built, brick by agonizing brick, on the foundation of a lie. She crumpled the note in her fist, the cheap paper crinkling like dry leaves. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. Someone knew. Someone remembered. After all this time, after all the sleepless nights, the quiet paranoia, the desperate assurances they'd given each other that no one else had seen, no one else could possibly connect them to that night, someone knew. Jessica scrambled for her phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. There were only 3 other people to call. 3 other people whose lives would be irrevocably shattered by this same message. First, Michael. He was the one who had always taken charge, the one who had orchestrated the cover-up, convinced them all that silence was their only option. He'd since become a successful real estate developer, a pillar of his community, a man with a carefully curated public image. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar, confident voice answered. "Jess? Everything okay? You never call this late." "Michael," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. It had happened. Someone sent a note. There was a beat of silence on the other end. A silence that stretched thick and heavy across the miles separating them. Then, a sharp intake of breath, and his voice, suddenly devoid of its usual bravado, was laced with a chilling dread. What did it say? It said, Jessica swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. It said, I know what you did that summer. And Michael, it came with Sarah's locket. Another silence, even longer this time, punctuated only by the distant hum of city traffic outside her window. She could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the frantic calculations, the instant realization that their carefully constructed fortress of lies had been breached. No, Michael finally whispered, the word a raw exhalation of disbelief and fear. No, this can't be happening. After all this time. It is, she insisted, her voice trembling. It's real. Someone knows, Michael. Someone knows everything. She could hear the tremor in her own words, the decade-old fear clawing its way back to the surface, fresh and potent as if it were still that night at Blackwood Lake, when a reckless decision, a petty argument, and a moment of pure unadulterated panic had forever bound their fates together. They were just kids barely out of high school, full of themselves, feeling invincible. They had been drinking, celebrating the end of another summer, full of the false bravado of youth. Sarah had interrupted their party, seeking out Michael for some reason Jessica couldn't even recall now, something about a debt, a broken promise. Words had escalated, things had been said, and in the ensuing chaos Sarah had stumbled, lost her footing and fallen. Not into the lake, but onto the jagged rocks near the shore, her head hitting with a sickening thud. The silence that followed had been deafening, broken only by the lapping of the water and the terrified gasps of the four friends. They hadn't meant for it to happen. It was an accident. But in their fear, their absolute terror of the consequences, they had made a choice. A terrible, irreversible choice. They had moved her, made it look like she'd simply wandered off, perhaps run away. They had cleaned up every trace, every shard of their presence, and then they had sworn an oath of silence, a pact forged in fear and desperation. And now, 10 years later, that pact was being tested. You need to call Emily and David, Jessica told Michael, her voice firmer now, fueled by a surge of desperate adrenaline. Tell them it's back. Michael just grunted, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Who could it be, Jess? Who would even remember? We were so careful. I don't know, Michael, she admitted, her gaze fixed on the crumpled note in her hand. But they know. And they want us to know that they know. This isn't just a threat. This is a game. And we're already losing. The comfort of her apartment, the carefully constructed illusion of safety, had evaporated. The scent of cedar and pine, now a vivid, suffocating memory, filled her nostrils. The peaceful rhythm of her life had been shattered, replaced by the relentless, terrifying beat of a ticking clock. The past wasn't buried. It had merely been waiting, lurking in the shadows, until the perfect moment to claw its way back into their lives. And that moment chillingly was now. The past wasn't buried. It had merely been waiting, lurking in the shadows, until the perfect moment to claw its way back into their lives. And that moment chillingly was now. Jessica's hand trembled, the anonymous note crinkling under her fingers. The smooth, heavy paper now felt like a venomous reptile, coiled and ready to strike. Each carefully printed block letter seared itself into her mind, a brand of pure terror. I know what you did last summer. The words echoed not just in her ears, but deep in the hollow of her chest, a relentless, suffocating beat. Her breath hitched. She wasn't just scared. She was utterly, profoundly undone. It had been years of forced smiles, of practiced nonchalance, of burying the memory so deep it felt like a dream, a nightmare she could almost convince herself never happened. But now it was real, tangible, and it was looking right at her. Her gaze darted around her apartment, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. Was someone watching? Had they always been watching? The comfortable familiarity of her living room twisted into a sinister stage, every shadow a potential hiding place, every creak of the old building a phantom footstep. She stumbled backward, clutching the note, her mind racing through every scenario, every impossible explanation. A prank? No. This felt too precise, too deliberate, too heavy with unspoken menace. Her hand, slick with cold sweat, fumbled for her phone. There were only 3 other people who shared this secret, 3 other souls equally burdened by the weight of that night. Michael, Emily, David. Her thumb hovered over Michael's contact, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He would know what to do. He always did. He was the one who had taken charge that night, the one who had rationalized, organized, and somehow convinced them all that they could outrun the truth. The phone rang twice, then Michael's voice, usually calm and steady, answered with a sharp, clipped edge. "Jessica? What's wrong? You sound terrible." "Michael," she gasped, the single word catching in her throat, thick with unshed tears. Did you get anything in the mail today?" A beat of silence stretched, taut and agonizing. She could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the sudden terrible understanding dawning on him. Then his voice, now stripped of its usual composure, was barely a whisper. "The note. You got one too, didn't you?" Relief, sharp and painful, flooded her, quickly followed by a fresh wave of dread. It wasn't just her. It was all of them. "The exact words," she confirmed, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "I know what you did last summer. And no return address. Just printed." "Same here," Michael said, a new tremor in his voice. "Just sitting there. Like it knew when to arrive. Like it's been waiting." He let out a ragged breath. "I've already called Emily. She's a mess. David isn't answering. Probably still at work, or ignoring calls." "We have to meet," Jessica insisted, the urgency a burning ember in her chest. "Now. All of us. We need to figure this out." "My apartment," Michael stated, his voice regaining a fraction of its usual authority, though it was still laced with undeniable fear. "It's central. Nobody knows where we live except us. Give me an hour to get Emily over here." "Try David again." Jessica hung up, her fingers still shaking. She scrolled to Emily's number, then hesitated. Emily was the most fragile among them, the one who had struggled the most with the aftermath. The thought of hearing her raw panic, her renewed guilt, was almost too much to bear. But she had to try. She pressed call. Emily's voice, when it answered, was already thick with tears. "Jessica? Oh my God, Jessica. It's real, isn't it? It's finally happening. After all this time, someone knows." Her words dissolved into choked sobs, each one a fresh stab of guilt for Jessica. Emily had never truly recovered. The weight of their secret had settled on her shoulders like a physical burden, bending her spirit, dimming her once bright eyes. "Emily, listen to me," Jessica tried, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "Michael wants us to meet at his place. He's already getting ready. Can you come?" I don't know. I can't breathe, Jessica. I can't think. This is a nightmare. A nightmare we can't wake up from." Emily's voice was barely audible, a fragile thread about to snap. "You have to," Jessica urged, her own fear pushing through. "We're in this together, remember? Always. Just like we promised. We'll figure it out. Just come to Michael's. Please, Emily." A long, shuddering sigh was Emily's only response before she mumbled, Okay, I'll try. I'll be there." The line went dead. "Next, David," Jessica called, and as Michael predicted, it went straight to voicemail. David, ever the elusive one, the one who always seemed to bounce back, to shrug off responsibility. But even David couldn't shrug off this. She left a terse message, devoid of emotion, simply stating, "David, it's Jessica. Get to Michael's apartment. Now. It's important. You got a note, didn't you? Call me back." The drive to Michael's apartment felt surreal. The world outside, bustling with everyday life, seemed oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in her own. People laughed, cars honked, music played from open windows. How could they not see the shadow that had fallen over everything? How could they not feel the cold dread that now clung to her like a shroud? Her mind, despite her desperate attempts to suppress it, began to conjure fragments of that summer night, pieces of a broken mirror reflecting a terrible truth. The oppressive humidity, the scent of pine and lake water, the distant echo of their own reckless laughter, the flash of headlights, the sickening thud, the desperate scramble in the dark, the cold, dark water, the chilling, unanimous decision, the pact of silence sealed not with blood, but with terror and the desperate hope of escape. She remembered Michael's grim determination, his voice low and firm, outlining the steps, silencing their panic. "No one saw us. No one knows we were here. We act like nothing happened. We go home. We never speak of this again. Ever." And they had tried. God, how they had tried. For years they had built their lives on that fragile foundation of lies and unspoken agreements. each one a silent participant in the conspiracy of their shared guilt. When Jessica arrived at Michael's apartment building, Emily was already there, huddled in the passenger seat of her small sedan, her face pale and tear-streaked. Jessica parked, got out, and walked over, opening the passenger door. Emily looked up, her eyes wide and bloodshot, her lips trembling. Without a word, Jessica reached in and pulled her into a tight embrace. Emily clung to her, shaking, her silent sobs racking her small frame. "We'll get through this, Em," Jessica whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "We have to." They walked into Michael's building, the elevator ride up feeling impossibly long, each floor a step closer to confronting the ghosts they had buried. Michael met them at the door, his face a grim mask, his usually impeccable hair slightly disheveled. The notes, 4 identical slips of paper, lay chillingly on his coffee table, arranged with a morbid precision, like evidence in a crime scene. "David just called," Michael said, his voice tight. "He got his. He's on his way." Took him a while to believe it wasn't some twisted joke. They sat on the sofa, a gaping space between them, as if the notes themselves radiated an invisible force field of dread. The silence in the room was suffocating, punctuated only by Emily's soft, intermittent sniffles. Each of them stared at the notes, then at each other, a silent question hanging heavy in the air. "Who?" David burst through the door about 20 minutes later, his face flushed, his usual swagger replaced by a frantic energy. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, throwing his own note onto the table, his voice loud, almost aggressive. "Who would do something like this? Is this some sick joke, Michael? Emily? Jessica?" His eyes darted between them, searching for an answer, a way out. "It's not a joke, David," Michael said, his voice flat. "It's real. And someone knows." David ran a hand through his hair, his bravado quickly crumbling. "But how? We were so careful. We covered every single detail. We made sure there were no witnesses. We swore to each other, remember?" His voice rose in pitch with each question, spiraling into a desperate plea. "We thought we did," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "But what if we missed something? What if someone did see us? What if it was someone connected to him?" The unspoken name hung in the air, a phantom presence in the room. Alex, the boy whose life they had, however accidentally, extinguished that night. The boy whose disappearance had been a local mystery for a few weeks, then slowly faded into the background, unsolved, forgotten by everyone but them. "We considered every angle back then," Michael said, trying to regain control, to sound like the pragmatic leader he had been. "We made sure there were no connections, no one who could link us to him. He was just a random guy out on the lake. Nobody special." "But he was special to someone," Jessica countered, her voice low. "Everyone is special to someone. A family, a friend. Someone could have been looking for him. Someone could have seen us and kept quiet all these years, just waiting for the right moment." The thought sent a fresh shiver down her spine. The idea that someone had been out there, stewing in their secret knowledge for years, watching them live their lives, build their careers, fall in love, while holding this terrifying card, was almost worse than the initial act itself. It implied a level of malice, a calculated patience that chilled her to the bone. "Why now?" David asked, his voice softer, laced with genuine fear. "Why after all this time? It's been what, 5 years? 6? 5 years, 3 months and 12 days, Emily murmured, her eyes distant, fixed on some unseen horror. Her meticulous memory for the date of their shared transgression was a cruel testament to her enduring guilt. "Maybe it's an anniversary," Jessica suggested, her voice barely a whisper. "Or maybe they just decided their patience had run out." The notes lay between them, stark white against the polished wood of the coffee table, a physical manifestation of their shared nightmare. They weren't just anonymous threats. They were declarations of war. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And the game, after years of terrifying silence, had just begun. The question wasn't if the sender knew, but what they planned to do with that knowledge. And the chilling truth settled over them like a shroud. Their lives, as they knew them, were already over. The past had finally come to collect its due. The past had finally come to collect its due. The note, clutched in Michael's trembling hand, felt like a burning coal. His carefully constructed life, built on forgetting, on burying that night under layers of ambition and normalcy, now crumbled around him. His breath hitched, a strangled sound escaping his throat. He stumbled backward, collapsing onto his couch, the pristine white envelope fluttering to the floor. "I know what you did last summer." The words echoed in his mind, not as a whisper but as a scream. He scrambled for his phone, fingers fumbling with the touchscreen. David. He had to call David. David, who always had a plan, who could think rationally even when Michael's world was imploding. The phone rang once, twice, a third time. No answer. Panic began to claw at Michael's throat. He tried Jessica. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Emily. The same. A cold dread seeped into his bones. Had they not received their notes yet? Or were they already dealing with a similar paralyzing terror? He paced his small apartment, the silence amplifying the frantic beat of his heart. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the old building sounded like a watchful presence. He remembered that night, the sharp crack of the gunshot echoing through the desolate woods, the sickening thud, the collective gasp of horror that had been instantly swallowed by the overwhelming silence. The blood, the desperate, whispered plans, the overwhelming, suffocating fear of discovery. They had been kids barely out of college, high on youth and a potent mix of bad decisions. They had been at David's family cabin, deep in the isolated foothills, celebrating nothing in particular, just being young and reckless. The gun had been David's father's hunting rifle, a foolish prop brought out during a drunken dare. A flash of light, a sudden movement, a catastrophic mistake. Michael stopped, leaning his forehead against the cool glass of his living room window, staring blindly at the city lights. It wasn't the initial accident that haunted him most, though that was a constant, festering wound. It was the decision they'd made afterward, the unanimous, terrified pact to make it disappear, to bury it literally and figuratively. They had convinced themselves it was self-preservation, that no one would believe them, that their lives would be ruined. And for years it had worked. They had graduated, started careers, built new lives, each of them carrying the silent, heavy burden, never speaking of it, not even to each other. Until now. His phone buzzed, startling him. It was David. Michael snatched it up, his voice hoarse. "David? Did you get it?" There was a long pause on the other end, filled only with the ragged sound of David's breathing. "Yeah, Michael. I got it." A picture of that old summer house key. And the words. God, the words. David's voice was strained, brittle. "Jessica just called me. She got one too. Emily. Emily's not answering." "I tried them all," Michael said, his own voice cracking. "What do we do? Who could it be?" "I don't know, Michael. I don't know. My mind's a blur. But we have to meet. Now. Somewhere safe. My place is out, it's too obvious. Jessica's too. Your apartment." "No," Michael shot back, glancing nervously around his own living room. "Nowhere we've ever been together. This person, they know everything. They know where we live, where we work. We can't risk it. Not yet." Okay, David said, his voice regaining a fraction of its usual composure, though the underlying panic was still evident. "The old diner on Elm Street? The one we used to hit after games? It's always busy, lots of people. We can blend in." Michael hesitated. It was a risk, meeting in public, but the thought of being alone, stewing in his fear, was worse. "All right. Give me 20 minutes. Tell Jessica." He hung up, his heart still thundering. He needed to be careful. Every step, every glance. Was someone watching him right now? He threw on a dark hoodie, pulling the hood low over his face, and grabbed his keys. As he reached the door, he paused, a chilling thought striking him. The note. He hadn't touched it since it fell. When he looked down, it was gone. The white envelope, the stark black lettering, vanished from his floor. A scream caught in his throat. He dropped to his knees, frantically searching under the couch, behind the coffee table. Nothing. It wasn't there. He had definitely seen it fall. He was sure of it. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just a note. This was a message delivered into his home. And now it had been taken from his home. The sender wasn't just observing from afar. They were close. Terrifyingly close. He fled his apartment, the door slamming shut behind him, the image of the vanished note burning into his mind. He didn't even remember locking it. The diner was a beacon of familiar, mundane noise. The clatter of plates, the murmur of conversations, the smell of stale coffee and fried food. Michael spotted David and Jessica huddled in a booth at the back, their faces pale and drawn beneath the fluorescent lights. Jessica, usually so vibrant and put together, looked like she hadn't slept in days. David, always the stoic one, kept glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Emily?" Michael asked, sliding into the booth next to Jessica, his voice barely a whisper. David shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "Still nothing. Voicemail. I even drove by her place. Lights are off. Car's there though. Maybe she's just gone offline hiding," Jessica suggested, her eyes wide with fear. "That's what I wanted to do. Just disappear." "We can't disappear," Michael said, his voice tight. "Not now. Not with this. My note, it vanished. From my apartment. After I read it, I dropped it, and when I looked again, it was gone." Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David's jaw tightened. "Are you serious? You think they were in your apartment? Or they have access?" Michael corrected, a shiver running down his spine. "Either way, it means they're not just sending letters. They're actively messing with us. They're here." "But who?" Jessica whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Who would even know? We swore we'd never tell anyone. Not a soul. It was just us four," David muttered, his gaze sweeping across the other diners, as if searching for a hidden threat. "No one else was there. No one saw anything. We made sure of it." "Except for him," Michael said, the unspoken name hanging heavy in the air between them. "Or her. The person who..." He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. The memory of that night surged back, vivid and horrifying. The argument, fueled by alcohol and simmering resentments. The gun, brought out in a moment of drunken bravado. The sudden, unexpected figure emerging from the darkness of the woods. A hiker perhaps, or someone lost. The startled cry, the accidental discharge. The body falling silently into the undergrowth. The frantic, desperate decision to move it, to bury it deep, to erase every trace. They had panicked. They had covered it up. And now someone knew. "We need to think," David urged, leaning forward, his voice low and urgent. "What did we miss? Who could have seen us? A hunter? A local? Someone who found something after we left?" "We scoured that place," Jessica insisted, her voice trembling. "We spent days there making sure. We even burned everything." "Everything but the truth," Michael said grimly. "And now it's back to burn us." As they spoke, a busboy, a young kid with an eager face, approached their table to clear some empty coffee cups. He smiled politely, but as he turned to leave, he paused, his eyes meeting Michael's. He didn't say anything, just offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then he placed a folded napkin on their table, right in front of Michael, and walked away. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. He waited until the busboy was out of earshot, then slowly, carefully, unfolded the napkin. Inside, scrawled in the same chilling, precise handwriting as the note he'd received at home, were 3 words. Asterisk, check your car. Asterisk. The color drained from Michael's face. David and Jessica leaned in, their eyes wide with terror as they read the message. The busboy, who had just been a harmless kid, was now a terrifying messenger. Their tormentor wasn't just watching from afar, sending notes. They were inside their lives, using ordinary people as pawns, delivering messages in plain sight. They were everywhere. The chilling realization settled over them. A new, deeper layer of dread. Their lives were no longer just threatened. They were being actively orchestrated, manipulated by an unseen hand. The chilling realization settled over them. A new, deeper layer of dread. Their lives were no longer just threatened. They were being actively orchestrated, manipulated by an unseen hand. The initial shock gave way to a gnawing, pervasive paranoia that seeped into every corner of their existence. Every shadow seemed to hold a watchful eye, every unexpected sound, a harbinger of the next chilling message. They tried to establish a new normal, a new routine, but how could you when your reality was being rewritten by an anonymous puppeteer? Michael, the pragmatic leader, attempted to rationalize, to find a pattern in the chaos. He meticulously documented every incident, every note, every bizarre occurrence, hoping to uncover a logical thread. But each new incident seemed designed to defy logic, to shatter any sense of control they tried to regain. One morning, he found a note tucked inside his daily newspaper, not on the doorstep, but within the business section he always read first. It wasn't just a generic threat. It referenced a specific minor detail from his morning routine, a detail only someone inside his home, or someone with an impossible level of surveillance could know. The message simply said, "Enjoy your coffee, Michael. It's the only thing you control." The casual intimacy of the threat was more terrifying than any explicit warning. Jessica, usually the picture of composure and professional calm, began to crack under the relentless pressure. Her work, her sanctuary, became another canvas for the stalker. A crucial client presentation weeks in the making was subtly sabotaged. A single, almost imperceptible word was altered in a key slide, changing the entire meaning of a financial projection, making it appear as if she had deliberately misled her firm. Luckily, she caught it just moments before the meeting, but the damage to her psyche was done. Her usually pristine office, a symbol of her meticulous nature, started to feel like a cage. Then a more direct attack. A note appeared on her office monitor, visible only when she logged in, hinting at a past professional misstep she had meticulously covered up years ago, a secret that could easily jeopardize her entire career. It read, "Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone, Jessica, especially when they're not yours." The implication was clear. The stalker knew not just about their shared secret, but also about their individual buried shames. David, the tech whiz, retreated further into his digital world, convinced he could outsmart the anonymous tormentor. He built firewalls, encrypted his communications, and set up an elaborate network of digital traps, hoping to lure the perpetrator into revealing themselves. He created a secure, end-to-end encrypted chat group for the four of them, believing it to be impenetrable. For a brief, fleeting moment, they felt a sliver of hope, a small island of security in their sea of fear. They exchanged messages, discussing theories, sharing their escalating dread in what they believed was absolute privacy. But then, as David was typing a new message, a reply appeared within their supposedly secure chat, a message that hadn't been sent by any of them. It was a perfectly phrased, cutting remark, directly quoting a private thought David had just shared with Michael moments before, mocking his efforts to secure their communications. It was signed with a single chilling emoji, a winking face. The digital fortress David had so painstakingly constructed had been breached, not just from the outside but from within. Their last bastion of privacy had been utterly violated. Emily, the most emotionally vulnerable of the group, found her carefully constructed online persona subtly altered. A seemingly innocuous post she had made years ago, a sentimental memory from a summer trip, was edited. A single ominous word, a word that only she and the others would recognize as a direct, horrifying reference to last summer, was seamlessly inserted into the caption. Her friends, who hadn't seen the original post in years, saw the updated version. The subtle alteration was a public display of her deepest guilt, an open wound for the world to see, even if only they understood its true meaning. Panic seized her as her phone began to buzz with concerned messages from people who knew her, asking if she was okay, if that post meant something. The stalker wasn't just observing. They were actively shaping their public image, using their own past against them, turning their memories into weapons. The psychological toll was immense. The group, once united by their shared secret, began to splinter under the relentless pressure. Paranoia, like a venomous serpent, coiled around their friendships, whispering doubts and suspicions. Who could be doing this? Was it truly an outsider, or was one of them perhaps a reluctant participant in this cruel charade? Michael found himself scrutinizing David's calm, almost detached analysis, wondering if his technological prowess was being used for a darker purpose. Jessica eyed Emily's increasingly erratic behavior, questioning if her past indiscretions were finally catching up, dragging them all down. David, in turn, noticed Michael's almost too perfect composure, wondering if his leadership was a front for something more sinister. Emily, overwhelmed and on the verge of breakdown, simply wanted it to stop, accusing them all, in moments of despair, of being complicit in their own torment. The constant surveillance, the impossible knowledge of their most private moments, shattered their trust in the world, and more dangerously, in each other. They stopped meeting in public, fearing hidden microphones or cameras. They spoke in hushed tones, even in their own homes, constantly scanning their surroundings. Sleep became a luxury, haunted by nightmares of past mistakes and future punishments. They were living in a panopticon, every move watched, every thought seemingly anticipated. The notes, the digital intrusions, the subtle manipulations of their lives were no longer just threats. They were carefully crafted provocations, pushing them closer and closer to the precipice of their buried secret. The anonymous tormentor wasn't just demanding they acknowledge what they did. They were forcing them to relive it, atom by atom, forcing them to confront the very event they had sworn to bury forever. It was a psychological war, designed to dismantle their lives from the inside out. And then the game changed once more. The messages, which had been increasingly personal, became less about individual shame and more about a collective reckoning. One evening, after a particularly tense and silent dinner between Michael and Jessica, a package arrived at Michael's door. It was small, nondescript, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside, nestled on a bed of shredded newspaper, was not another note, but an object. It was an antique-looking rusted iron key, clearly very old, with a distinctive ornate pattern on its head. Attached to the key by a thin wax string was a small hand-aged tag. On it, in the familiar, unsettling script, were 5 words: "The truth awaits where the silence began." Simultaneously, Jessica, David, and Emily received identical packages, each containing the same key and the same chilling message. The keys were identical, the tags identical, the message identical. This wasn't just a note, it was an invitation. And with the key came a cryptic address, printed on a separate, equally aged piece of parchment. It was an address they all recognized with a jolt of icy dread. An address they hadn't spoken aloud in years. A place they had tried to erase from their collective memory. It was an abandoned, secluded cabin, deep in the dense, whispering woods miles from any town. A place they had last seen on that fateful night. The night last summer became the unshakable foundation of their guilt. The silence began there. And now the truth awaited them there. The anonymous tormentor had not merely threatened them. They had orchestrated their return, forcing them back to the very epicenter of their shared nightmare. The rusted keys felt heavy in their hands, not just with their physical weight, but with the crushing burden of their past. They stood at a crossroads, individual figures in their separate homes, but bound by the undeniable pull of that single terrifying destination. To ignore the invitation was to invite further, unimaginable torment into their already fractured lives. To accept it was to walk willingly into the maw of the very secret they had sworn to keep buried forever, to face whatever horrors awaited them in that desolate, forgotten cabin. The choice was clear, yet utterly impossible. The cabin beckoned, a silent, ominous promise of revelation and retribution. The cabin beckoned, a silent, ominous promise of revelation and retribution. With a chilling resolve born of desperation, Michael, Jessica, David, Emily, and Sarah packed a few essentials, their faces grim, their silence heavier than any spoken word. The decision to confront the anonymous tormentor, to walk willingly into the maw of their deepest fear, had been agonizing. Yet what choice remained? To run was to surrender their lives to an unseen puppet master. To stay was to invite an escalating terror into their homes. The only path forward, however perilous, lay through the shadowed woods, towards that isolated, forgotten structure. The drive was a descent into a psychological abyss. Jessica, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, navigated the winding, increasingly treacherous road. Rain, fine at first, began to lash against the windshield, blurring the already fading light of the afternoon. The sky overhead was a bruised purple, mirroring the collective dread that pressed down on them. David, usually the group's stoic anchor, stared blankly out the window, his jaw clenched, every bump in the road a jolt to his frayed nerves. Emily huddled in the back seat, her arms wrapped around herself, trembling visibly, her earlier defiance having crumbled into raw, unadulterated fear. Sarah, next to her, tried to offer a comforting hand, but her own eyes darted nervously between the rearview mirror and the darkening forest, seeing threats in every swaying shadow. Michael, riding shotgun, was a coiled spring of tension, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, as if willing the cabin to appear, to get this nightmare over with. He kept replaying the chilling messages, the subtle threats, the insidious way their lives had been systematically unraveled. Who was doing this? And how could they possibly know every detail of that fateful summer? The paved road soon gave way to a dirt track, barely discernible beneath the encroaching undergrowth. The car groaned, tires slipping in the deepening mud. The dense canopy overhead blocked out the last vestiges of daylight, plunging them into a premature twilight. The air grew colder, damp with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. The silence in the car was broken only by the rhythmic thud of the wipers and the drumming rain, a morbid soundtrack to their journey into the unknown. Each turn brought them deeper into an unforgiving wilderness, an environment perfectly suited for secrets to fester and nightmares to take root. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the car lurched to a halt. Jessica killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, punctuated only by the relentless patter of rain. Through the rain-streaked windshield, they saw it. The cabin. It was exactly as Michael remembered it from the old photos, only far more dilapidated, more menacing in its decay. Boards were nailed haphazardly across some windows, others were shattered, gaping like empty eyesores. The porch sagged precariously, overgrown with thorny vines. The entire structure leaned slightly, as if exhausted by the weight of time and whatever dark histories it contained. An ancient, gnarled oak stood sentinel beside it, its bare branches clawing at the leaden sky. A shiver, colder than the biting wind, ran through Michael. This was it. The place where their past waited. "We need to be careful," David finally broke the silence, his voice a low rumble, barely audible above the rain. "There's no telling who or what is waiting inside." Emily whimpered, pulling her knees to her chest. "I don't want to go in there. What if it's a trap? What if they're in there?" "We have to, Emily," Sarah said, her voice strained but firm. "We came all this way. We can't turn back now." Michael took a deep breath, pushing open his door. The wind immediately whipped around him, chilling him to the bone. "We stick together. No one goes off alone. And don't touch anything until we've assessed the situation." They emerged from the car, huddling together, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the gloom and rain. The ground beneath their feet was a muddy quagmire, each step squelching ominously. The air was thick with a metallic tang, perhaps just the scent of wet rust from the cabin, or something more sinister. As they approached the porch, Michael noticed something that made his blood run cold. Despite the heavy rain, there were distinct, fresh tire tracks leading up to the cabin, barely visible in the mud, but undeniably recent. Someone had been here, and very recently. Their tormentor hadn't just sent them a note. They had been here, preparing for their arrival. The front door, warped and splintered, hung ajar, revealing a maw of impenetrable darkness. No lock, no barrier. An invitation or a taunt. David pushed it open further with a creaking groan that echoed through the empty woods. The stench inside was immediate and overwhelming. Mildew, decay, and something else, something cloying and metallic that made Emily gag. Their flashlights danced across a scene of utter dereliction. Furniture was overturned, dust coated every surface in a thick blanket, cobwebs draped from the ceiling like morbid decorations. It was as if time had stopped here decades ago, leaving behind a ghost of a lifelong past. "It's been abandoned for years," Jessica whispered, her voice barely a breath. "No one could live here." "But someone was here," Michael countered, his beam sweeping across the floor. "Look." In the thick layer of dust, there were footprints. Not old ones, but fresh, clear imprints of boots, leading from the doorway deeper into the cabin. And not just one set. It looked like several crisscrossing the floor. Their stalker wasn't alone, or had been here multiple times. They moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The floorboards groaned under their weight, each step a potential betrayal. They checked the main living area, the small, grimy kitchen, and what appeared to be a single bedroom. All were in similar states of disarray. There was nothing, no note, no obvious trap, no sign of their tormentor. Just the crushing weight of their own fear. "This is pointless," Emily cried, her voice cracking. "There's nothing here but dust and decay. They just wanted to scare us, to make us come all the way out here for nothing." "Wait," Sarah said, her flashlight beam fixed on a small, narrow door at the back of the living area, half hidden behind a fallen bookshelf. "What's in there?" Michael, heart pounding, carefully pushed the bookshelf aside. The door behind it was made of rough, unfinished wood, and unlike the front door, it was secured with a heavy, rusted padlock. But the lock was hanging open, its shackle broken. Someone had forced it. David pulled the door open slowly, revealing a cramped, pitch-black space. The air emanating from it was even colder than the rest of the cabin, carrying a faint, disturbing aroma that Michael couldn't quite place. As their combined flashlight beams pierced the darkness, they revealed a small, windowless crawl space, barely large enough for a person to stand upright. And within it, something was arranged with chilling precision. Against the far wall, on a small makeshift table fashioned from an upturned crate, sat a collection of objects. A faded, water-damaged photograph of the five of them, taken years ago, laughing carelessly on a summer beach, was propped up at the center, but their faces had been meticulously defaced, eyes scratched out, smiles twisted into grimaces with a stark, red marker. Beside it, a single tarnished silver locket lay open, revealing a tiny, almost invisible inscription inside. Michael felt a jolt of recognition, a cold dread seizing him. He knew that locket. It had belonged to someone else, someone they all knew, someone who was not supposed to be part of their secret. And then his flashlight beam fell upon the final, most horrifying item. Resting on the crate directly beneath the defaced photograph was a small, crudely carved wooden bird, its wings outstretched as if in flight. It was identical to the one Michael had carved for his younger sister, Lily, years ago. The one she had carried everywhere, the one that had gone missing around the same time it happened. A wave of nausea washed over him. This wasn't just about their secret anymore. This was about Lily, and whoever was behind this knew everything. A new note lay folded beside the bird. Michael, his hand trembling, picked it up. He unfolded the crisp paper, the stark black letters jumping out at him, a fresh wave of terror washing over the group as he read it aloud, his voice barely a whisper against the drumming rain outside. "Welcome home. I've been waiting. You thought you buried the past, but some things refuse to stay dead, especially when they have a voice, and a story, and a brother who never forgot. Let the game begin. Your next clue is where the summer sun never sets." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The mention of Lily, of her bird, twisted the knife deeper into Michael's gut. This wasn't just about a shared secret. This was personal. This was about retribution. And the game had only just begun. The cabin, once a symbol of their past, had become the first stage of a terrifying, meticulously planned ordeal. One that promised to expose not just their secret, but the very depths of their souls. The stalker wasn't just watching. They were actively manipulating, pushing them further down a path of no return, each step revealing a new, horrifying layer of their forgotten past. The air in Michael's living room was thick with a silence far more oppressive than any scream. Jessica sat huddled on the sofa, her face pale, eyes wide and unseeing, still processing the chilling implication of the note they'd found just hours before. A faded photograph, not of them, not of the victim, but of a small, forgotten shack deep in the woods, a place they hadn't thought about in years, a place they were certain no one else knew about. It wasn't just a threat. It was a surgical dissection of their most guarded memories, a direct challenge to the very fabric of their carefully constructed amnesia. "How?" David finally whispered, his voice hoarse, breaking the suffocating quiet. He paced the worn carpet, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "How could they possibly know about the shack? We never even talked about that. Not once. Not to anyone." Emily, usually the quietest, was staring fixedly at the photograph, her knuckles white where she clutched a crumpled tissue. "We didn't just not talk about it, David. We erased it. We all agreed to pretend it never existed. It was just a place we went to sometimes." Her voice was barely a whisper, laden with a guilt that seemed to weigh physically on her. Michael, typically the unshakable leader, felt a tremor run through him. This wasn't just about what they did that summer. It was about the layers beneath, the unspoken truths, the places their minds had deliberately sealed off. The stalker wasn't just a witness. They were an archaeologist of their darkest secrets, digging deeper and deeper, exposing not just their actions, but their very complicity in the cover-up. The note accompanying the photograph was simple, yet devastating. Asterisk, some secrets are buried deeper than others. But nothing stays buried forever. Especially not the truth that hides in the shadows of a forgotten place. Asterisk. "It means," Michael said, his voice strained, "that someone was watching us before it happened. Or someone knew about our secret spots. Someone who isn't part of our group now." Jessica finally stirred, her eyes flickering with a frantic energy. "Or someone is part of our group, Michael. Someone who knows they know and is playing us. Who else could possibly remember the shack? Who else had access to those memories? We were so careful." Her gaze swept across their faces, lingering on each one, a nascent suspicion blooming in her terror-stricken eyes. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. David stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing at Jessica. "Are you saying one of us is doing this? After everything we've been through? What else are we supposed to think, David?" she retorted, her voice rising. "This isn't just about the incident anymore. This is about everything. Our entire past. And only we know everything. Emily flinched, pulling her arms tighter around herself. The unspoken truth was that while they had all shared the burden of the main secret, each of them carried smaller, individual secrets, vulnerabilities they had never dared expose even to each other. The stalker seemed to be honing in on those, picking them apart one by one. Over the next few days, the stalker's attacks grew more insidious, more personal. Jessica received an anonymous email containing a scanned image of her old high school diary, open to a page detailing her secret crush on a boy who had moved away right before that summer. A crush she had completely forgotten, a detail so trivial, yet so deeply private, that its exposure felt like a violation of her very soul. The email subject line read, *, some feelings never fade, just like some memories. * Jessica was a wreck, convinced the stalker was inside her head, plucking out her deepest, most innocent thoughts and twisting them into tools of torment. David found his meticulously organized research files on his laptop corrupted, replaced with a single looping video clip of a news report from nearly 15 years ago, detailing a minor local scandal involving his father's struggling construction company. David had spent years trying to distance himself from his father's questionable business practices, working tirelessly to build his own reputation. The video was a direct hit below the belt, a public humiliation from his past he had fought tooth and nail to bury. The video played on repeat, the news anchor's voice a mocking echo in his quiet apartment. And then there was Michael. He received a package unmarked delivered to his office. Inside, nestled on a bed of shredded newspaper, was a single rusted fishing lure. The exact lure he had lost years ago in the old quarry pond, a childhood token he cherished. Attached to it was a small handwritten tag. * some treasures are best left at the bottom, but the current always brings them back. * Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The lure wasn't just a random item, it was a symbol of a forgotten summer, a detail so specific, so utterly insignificant to anyone but him, that it screamed of an intimate, almost obsessive knowledge. The group met again, this time in a panic-stricken frenzy. The individual attacks had shattered their already fragile sense of security, replacing it with a suffocating paranoia. They're not just targeting the secret anymore, Emily said, her voice trembling. They're targeting us. Our individual lives. Our weaknesses. This is too much, Jessica sobbed, burying her face in her hands. They know everything. Everything. My diary. How could anyone possibly know about my diary? Michael clenched his fists, his mind racing. It means they've been studying us for a very long time. Not just what we did, but who we are. Our entire histories. This isn't random. This is calculated. David, for once, had no logical explanation. He just stared blankly at the wall, the looping news report of his father's scandal still playing in his mind. It's like they're trying to unravel us thread by thread, not just to expose the secret, but to destroy us from the inside out. The shack, Emily murmured, bringing them back to the original photograph. Why the shack? What's special about it? We only went there once or twice, right? Before everything. Michael frowned, trying to dredge up the hazy memories. The shack was an old, dilapidated hunting cabin, deep in the woods near the quarry. They'd stumbled upon it when they were kids, a secret hideout, a place to smoke cigarettes and tell ghost stories. But after that summer, they'd avoided it, as if its very existence was a painful reminder. We didn't do anything in the shack, Michael insisted, trying to reassure himself as much as the others. Not related to, you know. Are you sure, Michael? David asked, his voice low, his eyes fixed on him. Are you absolutely 100% sure there wasn't anything else? Anything at all that connects to it? The question hung heavy, pricking at the edges of Michael's memory. He remembered a vague sense of unease about the shack, even before the main incident, a feeling that something wasn't quite right, but he couldn't pinpoint it. It was like trying to grasp smoke. Suddenly, Emily gasped, her eyes wide with the dawning horror. The sketchbook. Do you remember? The one we found in the shack? The one with all the drawings. Michael felt a jolt. The sketchbook. Yes, he'd completely forgotten about it. It was old, dusty, filled with intricate, almost disturbing sketches of local wildlife and strange, abstract patterns. They'd found it tucked away in a loose floorboard. They had been fascinated by it for a few days, wondering who the artist was, before getting bored and leaving it behind. What about it, Emily? Jessica asked, her voice trembling, sensing the weight of Emily's revelation. The drawings, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. They weren't just random. Some of them were of the quarry. And there was one drawing. Person standing by the water. And they were holding something. Something that looked like a fishing lure. Michael's blood ran cold. The fishing lure. The one that had just been delivered to his office. The one he had lost in the quarry years ago. He had dismissed it as a random personal attack, a mere symbol of his past. But what if it was more? What if it was a connection? And the quarry, Emily continued, her voice gaining a frantic edge. There was a name written on the inside cover of the sketchbook. I only saw it once, but it stuck with me. A name we never knew. A name we never thought about again. What name, Emily? David urged, leaning forward, his face etched with a desperate hope for a new lead, a new enemy. Emily's gaze darted between them, a profound fear in her eyes. It was a name that had been buried so deep in the recesses of their collective memory, a detail so seemingly irrelevant to their own crime, that they had simply forgotten it, relegated it to the background noise of life. But now it resonated with a terrifying new significance, a missing piece of the puzzle that the stalker was forcing them to unearth. It was Rachel, Emily finally choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel Miller. The name hung in the air, a phantom from their past, a ghost they had never known existed. Rachel Miller. Who was she? Why was her sketchbook in the shack? And what did she have to do with the quarry, a fishing lure, and the horrifying secret they had tried so desperately to bury? The stalker wasn't just exposing their past. They were rewriting it, revealing a hidden narrative far more complex and sinister than they could have ever imagined. The game had changed. They were no longer just running from a witness. They were trapped in a labyrinth of forgotten truths, each turn leading them closer to a confrontation with a past they didn't even recognize, and a stalker who knew every single one of its terrifying secrets. The group, reeling from the realization that their understanding of the past was deeply flawed, gathered again at Michael's secluded cabin. The air was thick with a new kind of dread, not just the fear of exposure, but the chilling uncertainty of their own memories. Michael paced, his jaw tight. Jessica sat hunched, staring into the flickering fireplace as if searching for answers in the flames. David, visibly shaken, clutched a mug of cold coffee, his eyes darting to every shadow. Emily, ever the most composed, now seemed to carry a burden heavier than the others, a subtle tremor in her hands betraying her usual calm. This is insane. Jessica finally broke the silence, her voice hoarse. Someone knows everything, but they're also twisting it, making it something we don't recognize. What else did we miss? What else happened that summer? Michael stopped pacing, turning to face them. That's it. We have to go back. Not just to the accident, but to everything leading up to it and everything after. There has to be a piece we're missing, something significant enough to explain this level of manipulation. David looked up, his face pale. Go back where? To Oak Haven? That's exactly what the stalker wants, isn't it? To lure us back to the scene of the crime, or whatever this is. Emily, her gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the window, spoke softly. Maybe not to Oak Haven itself, but to our memories. Individually, what do we each remember, truly, beyond the shared narrative we've constructed to protect ourselves? A heavy silence descended. Their shared narrative had been a shield, a carefully constructed version of events designed to minimize guilt and ensure their collective survival. But now that shield was crumbling, revealing cracks through which terrifying new possibilities seeped. Okay, Michael said, taking a deep breath. Let's start from the beginning of that summer. The last time we were all together before the accident. We were at the lake house, right? Emily, your family's place. Emily nodded slowly. Yes, my parents were away. We had the whole week. It was supposed to be a celebration before college. And what happened that week? Jessica pressed, her eyes on Emily. Anything unusual? Any arguments? Any strangers? Emily hesitated, her brow furrowing in concentration. Not really. Just typical summer stuff. Bonfires, swimming, a little too much to drink sometimes. The usual group from high school coming and going. Nothing that felt dangerous. What about that guy? David interjected, his voice quiet. The one who kept showing up. Mark, I think his name was? He was always around, always watching. Michael frowned. Mark? Who was Mark? Jessica snapped her fingers. Oh, I remember him. He was a bit of a loner, wasn't he? Always had that intense stare. He was obsessed with Emily, if I recall correctly. Emily flinched, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. He was persistent. He lived in the next town over, but he'd show up at the lake sometimes or try to talk to me after school. It was annoying but not threatening. I told him to leave me alone, and he usually did eventually. But he was there that week, wasn't he? David insisted. I remember seeing him near the lake house a couple of times. He was always lurking. Yes, Emily admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He showed up one evening. I told him to go. He got upset. Upset how? Michael asked, sensing a new threat. Emily finally met their gaze, her eyes wide. He yelled. Said I was a tease. Said I was playing games. He threatened to make me regret it. I just laughed him off. We all did. Thought he was just a pathetic kid. A cold dread began to settle in Michael's stomach. And then what? Did you see him again before? The accident. Emily shook her head. No, not that I remember. He stormed off into the woods. The cabin suddenly felt colder, the shadows deeper. Could this Mark, this forgotten figure, be connected? Was he the stalker? But the notes, the sophisticated manipulation. It felt like more than just a spurned admirer. The anonymous note started after the accident, right? Jessica mused. But what if the stalker wasn't just observing us then? What if they were involved in something else before the accident? Something that made the accident itself look like a convenient cover-up for an entirely different crime. The idea hung in the air, chilling them to the bone. They had been so focused on the hit and run, on the death of the unknown pedestrian, that they hadn't considered a larger, more sinister tapestry. But what could that be? David pleaded, rubbing his temples. What else could we have done? Michael's mind raced. He remembered the frantic panic after the impact, the collective decision to flee, the desperate pact of silence. But now a new unease settled in. He remembered the strange silence of the forest that night, the way the moonlight had cast long, distorted shadows, making everything seem alien. And then a fleeting image, almost like a dream. Another car, a dark sedan parked on the shoulder of the road, a little further down from where they'd hit the pedestrian. He dismissed it as a random car or passerby, but now, I think I remember something, Michael said slowly, his voice laced with uncertainty. After we hit him, as we drove away, I saw another car, parked, not moving, just sitting there on the side of the road, maybe a quarter-mile down from the impact site. Jessica gasped. Another car? Michael, why didn't you ever say anything? I don't know, he retorted, frustration and fear mixing in his voice. It was chaos. Panic. I just thought it was someone pulled over, maybe broken down. It didn't register as important. I was just trying to get us out of there. Emily's eyes widened further. Wait, I think I remember seeing something too. Not a car, but a figure. Near the car, I think. Standing in the shadows. I thought it was just a tree, or my imagination. David shook his head, utterly bewildered. This is impossible. We went over every detail 1,000 times. How could we forget something like this? Because we wanted to forget, Jessica said, her voice sharp with a sudden dreadful clarity. We wanted to forget everything that didn't fit our narrative. We wanted to believe it was a simple, tragic accident that we covered up. But what if it wasn't simple at all? The implications were staggering. If there was another car, another person present that night, then their carefully constructed alibi, their shared lie, was even more fragile than they thought. It meant there was another potential witness, or worse, another participant. Just then, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound came from the front door. It wasn't loud enough to be a knock, more like something being dragged lightly across the wood. All four of them froze, their eyes locking on the door. The cabin was isolated, deep in the woods. No one would be visiting at this hour. Michael slowly rose, his hand instinctively going for the heavy iron poker by the fireplace. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He crept towards the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scratching stopped. He listened intently, hearing only the rhythmic creaks of the old cabin and the frantic pounding of his own blood. He peered through the peephole, but saw nothing but the dense, moonlit forest. Taking a deep breath, he cautiously unlatched the door and pulled it open a crack, ready to slam it shut. No one was there. But on the doormat, illuminated by the porch light, lay a small, intricately folded paper crane. Michael's blood ran cold. He recognized it instantly. Emily had always been skilled at origami, a hobby she picked up in high school. She used to make these cranes for luck for friends. He'd even found one in his backpack after that summer, a small forgotten token. He picked it up, his fingers trembling. It was made from a piece of paper that looked distinctly familiar. He unfolded it carefully. Inside, scrawled in neat, almost elegant handwriting, were just 3 words. Asterisk, he wasn't alone. Asterisk. Michael stumbled back, gasping, clutching the note. Jessica, David, and Emily rushed to him, their faces etched with terror. He thrust the paper into Emily's hand. Emily's eyes scanned the words, then her gaze fell to the paper itself. Her face drained of all color. "This paper," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is from my old journal. The one I kept that summer. The one I thought I lost." The revelation hit them like a physical blow. The stalker wasn't just someone who knew what they did. They had been inside Emily's most private thoughts, had access to her most personal belongings, and now used it to deliver a message that shattered their reality. The pedestrian they hit that night. He wasn't alone. Another person was there. And the stalker knew who. The carefully constructed world they had built, the fragile illusion of their shared guilt and their singular secret, collapsed around them. This was not about an accident anymore. This was about something far deeper, far darker, a web woven in the shadows, waiting for them to finally unravel it, piece by terrifying piece. And the stalker was just getting started. The world as they knew it had not just shifted, it had completely collapsed around them. This was not about an accident anymore. This was about something far deeper, far darker, a web woven in the shadows, waiting for them to finally unravel it, piece by terrifying piece. And the stalker was just getting started. The air around them crackled with a new kind of terror, a cold, insidious dread that seeped into their bones. The makeshift memorial, the chilling message, it all pointed to an unimaginable truth. Jessica sagged against Michael, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Emily stood frozen, her eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on the disturbing tableau before them. David, usually the most composed, was clenching his fists, his knuckles white. "No," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, this can't be happening. He was there. We hit him. It was an accident." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Michael shook his head slowly, the memory of the impact replaying in his mind, but this time with a horrifying new context. It wasn't just an accident, Jess. Not to him. He gestured vaguely at the memorial. The stalker knows something we don't. Something about Arthur Miller. Arthur Miller? Emily finally spoke, her voice strained. Who even was Arthur Miller? We just knew him as the man we hit. The realization that they had never even bothered to learn his name until the notes started arriving was a bitter pill to swallow. David slammed his fist lightly against a nearby tree trunk, the sharp thud startling them all. "Think, people. The stalker isn't just punishing us. They're using us. They want us to find something out. They want us to dig." He looked from face to face, his expression grim. "They're not just saying, 'I know what you did last summer.' They're saying, 'I know what really happened last summer, and you're going to help me expose it.'" A chilling silence descended, broken only by the rustling leaves. David's words hung heavy in the air, undeniable and terrifying. The stalker wasn't just an avenger. They were a puppet master, pulling their strings, forcing them into a conspiracy far larger than their own reckless mistake. Jessica's eyes darted around, her paranoia spiking. "So what do? We just do what they want. We become their little detectives? What if we find something and it just puts us in even more danger? What if this whole thing is a trap to get us arrested? We're already in danger, Jess." Michael retorted, his voice rising. "Running isn't an option. We tried that, remember? The notes, the threats, the constant surveillance. It's only gotten worse. Our only way out is through this. We have to understand what Arthur Miller truly was, and why he was really on that road." Emily, ever the pragmatist despite her fear, nodded. "Michael's right. We can't go to the police. Not with our secret. But we can't ignore this either. The stalker is leading us somewhere. We need to figure out where. The decision, though born of desperation and fear, was made. They would investigate. They would become the unwilling pawns in a game they didn't understand, hoping that by uncovering the truth, they might somehow salvage their own lives. Back at the house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. They spread out, each grappling with their own task, while the unspoken fear of being watched permeated every shadow. What about Arthur Miller? Emily began, pulling out her laptop. Anything on him? Anything at all beyond the vague police report that just listed him as an unidentified pedestrian? David, already hunched over his own array of screens, shook his head. Homeless people usually don't have much of a digital footprint. No credit cards, no social media, no recent addresses. It's like they just vanish. But he had to come from somewhere, Michael interjected, pacing restlessly. Nobody's born on the streets. He had a past, a life. He stopped, his eyes unfocused, replaying the night of the accident over and over. I keep thinking about that night. Right before the impact, there was something. A shadow. A flash of light in the distance, like a vehicle driving away very fast. I dismissed it as fatigue, as my eyes playing tricks. But what if it wasn't? Jessica scoffed, though her voice lacked conviction. Michael, you were panicked. You were probably seeing things. Maybe, he conceded, but the doubt lingered in his eyes. But what if I wasn't? What if there was another car? What if Arthur was already incapacitated when we hit him? Or placed there? The words hung heavy, sickening them all. That's why we need to find out who Arthur Miller was, Emily insisted, her fingers flying across her keyboard, searching local news archives, public records, anything that might mention a man by that name in the past decade. Before he was on the streets. What brought him there? Hours crawled by, filled with the click of keyboards and the tense silence of their collective anxiety. Jessica sat huddled on the couch, watching the windows, convinced that any moment the stalker would appear, a specter of their guilt. Michael tried to calm her, but his own unease was palpable. Then, a sudden exclamation from David startled them. Wait, what is this? His voice was hushed, almost reverent. They crowded around his screen. David had stumbled upon a dusty corner of the internet, an old digitized newspaper archive from nearly 7 years ago. The article was small, buried deep in the local section, titled, Junior Financial Analyst Disappears. Beneath it, a grainy, slightly faded photograph of a man. A much younger man, clean-shaven, dressed in a sharp suit with intelligent if slightly weary eyes. It was undeniably Arthur Miller. Their breath caught in their throats. Arthur Miller wasn't just a random homeless man. He had been a junior financial analyst at a reputable firm in the city, Sterling Holdings. The article stated he had vanished without a trace, his apartment left undisturbed, his car found abandoned near a hiking trail. The police had investigated, but the case had gone cold. He was presumed a runaway, or perhaps a victim of misadventure, but nothing concrete was ever found. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. The man they had struck, the man whose accidental death they had covered up, was not some faceless victim of circumstance. He was a man with a past, a career, a disappearance that had once been a minor local mystery. Sterling Holdings, Emily murmured, her mind already racing. A financial firm. What was he working on? Michael felt a surge of cold dread. He didn't just become homeless. He disappeared. And then years later he ends up on that road, right in front of our car. The pieces, horrifyingly, began to connect. Arthur Miller wasn't simply a homeless man who wandered into their path. He had been put there, or he had ended up there as a direct consequence of whatever he was involved in at Sterling Holdings. Their accident was a meticulously planned cover-up, or a tragic convenience for someone else. Just as the full weight of this realization settled upon them, a soft thud echoed from the front door. They all froze, every nerve ending screaming. No one had ordered anything. No one was expected. Jessica whimpered, backing away. It's him. He knows we found something. Michael, heart pounding, cautiously approached the door. He peered through the peephole, seeing nothing but the empty porch. Taking a deep breath, he slowly opened the door. On the welcome mat lay a small, unassuming package, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address, no sender. He picked it up, his fingers trembling. Inside, nestled amongst some packing peanuts, was a single worn USB drive, and a small handwritten note, scrawled in the familiar, unsettling script of their tormentor. He tried to tell them, "You listen." David, snatching the drive, immediately plugged it into a burner laptop they kept for emergencies, his face a mask of grim determination. The drive contained fragmented files, spreadsheets filled with complex financial data, cryptic notes jotted down in a frantic hand, and several audio recordings. As David started playing the first audio file, a voice, unmistakably Arthur Miller's, filled the tense silence of the room. It was shaky, urgent, detailing financial irregularities, suspicious transactions, and a massive embezzlement scheme at Sterling Holdings. He spoke of powerful individuals, their names whispered in fear, their connections reaching high into local politics and beyond. Arthur had been trying to expose them, gathering evidence, but someone had found out. He had been close to going public, to handing over his findings. The audio abruptly cut off with a sudden, muffled sound followed by silence. The group stared at the laptop screen, then at each other, their faces pale with a new profound horror. The accident wasn't an accident. Arthur Miller hadn't just disappeared. He had been murdered to silence him, and his body disposed of in a way that would look like a tragic, anonymous hit and run. Their car, their actions, had simply been a convenient tool for the real perpetrators. They weren't just covering up their crime anymore. They were now holding evidence of a far greater, far more dangerous conspiracy. The stalker wasn't just punishing them. They were using them to finish what Arthur Miller had started. They had forced their hand, plunging them into a world of ruthless criminals who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The stakes had never been higher. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken terror. Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily exchanged glances, each face a mask of dawning horror. They weren't just targets anymore, they were instruments, pawns in a game far larger and deadlier than they could have imagined. The anonymous architect of their misery wasn't just exposing their past, they were weaponizing it, forcing them to complete Arthur Miller's final dangerous act. A new message, delivered with chilling precision through the same untraceable channels, detailed their next steps. It wasn't a choice, it was an ultimatum. They were to retrieve a specific set of encrypted data from a decommissioned data center on the outskirts of the city, a facility once partially owned by a shell corporation linked to Arthur Miller. The data the message implied was crucial. Its contents could unravel a vast network of illicit dealings, implicating powerful figures far beyond their small circle. The criminals, it seemed, wanted this data to protect themselves, to silence the echoes of Miller's past before they could expose them. The anonymous sender, however, clearly had other intentions. They were using the criminals' desperation to push the friends deeper, to ensure the data saw the light of day, or at least reached their hands. The data center was a relic, a hulking concrete structure abandoned years ago, its windows boarded, its gates rusted shut. A perfect place for secrets to fester. Their instructions were clear: bypass the rudimentary security, locate Miller's specific server rack, and extract the data onto a provided encrypted drive. The message ended with a single stark warning: fail and your secrets will be the least of your worries. Succeed, and your freedom may be the only thing you lose. Michael, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak, his voice a strained whisper. This is insane. We're breaking into a secure facility for actual criminals. What if we get caught? What if they're just setting us up? Jessica, her face pale, gripped her phone. We don't have a choice, Michael. They know everything. About us. About what we did. And now they know about Miller's involvement. If we don't do this, who knows what they'll expose, or worse, what these criminals will do to us or our families. David, usually the calmest, was pacing, his hands running through his hair. But why us? Why are we the ones being forced into this? Why not send their own people? Emily, who had been staring blankly at the wall, finally looked at them, her eyes wide with fear. Because we're expendable. And because the person sending these notes knows we're desperate. They're using our secret as leverage, not just against us but against the criminals too. Don't you see? They're making us do the dirty work for both sides. The realization hung in the air, a suffocating truth. They were caught in the crossfire of two powerful unseen forces. One, the ruthless criminal organization desperate to protect its empire. The other, the mysterious orchestrator of their nightmare, seeking a twisted form of justice or revenge, using them as their unwitting agents. Their first challenge was reconnaissance. They drove by the abandoned data center, a ghost in the industrial district. The perimeter fence was indeed corroded, but a single modern security camera, almost ironically out of place, was mounted near the main entrance. It clearly wasn't for show. "They're watching," Emily observed, her voice barely audible. "The criminals or the note sender or both. They want to make sure we go through with it." Over the next few days, under the constant invisible threat, they meticulously planned their infiltration. David, with his tech background, researched the building's old blueprints, while Jessica, surprisingly resourceful under pressure, scouted potential entry points and escape routes. Michael, burdened by the leadership forced upon him, tried to keep their fractured group together, while Emily, increasingly withdrawn, meticulously studied the schematics of the server racks, trying to anticipate any traps or additional security measures. The night arrived, a moonless canvas of urban gloom. The air was cold, damp, carrying the faint scent of rain. They parked several blocks away, their hearts hammering against their ribs. Each step towards the data center felt like walking into a trap. Jessica, using a set of bolt cutters, made quick work of a weakened section of the fence. The metallic clang echoed eerily in the silence. Inside, the vast, cavernous space was a labyrinth of cold, dark steel. Rows upon rows of empty server racks stood like skeletal sentinels, silent and imposing. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of decay. "According to the blueprints, Miller's company leased this section," David whispered, pointing his flashlight down a narrow aisle. "Server rack 12B. Should be near the back." As they navigated the eerie silence, the beam of Michael's flashlight swept over a discarded security panel. Its wires cut, its screen shattered. "Someone else has been here," he murmured, a knot tightening in his stomach. "Or they disabled it themselves." They reached rack 12B. Unlike the others, which were empty or filled with defunct hardware, this one was sealed with a heavy-duty padlock. Emily, with a surprising calm, produced a set of lock-picking tools. Her hands, usually trembling, were steady as she worked. The click of the tumblers breaking sent a jolt through them all. Inside, nestled amongst outdated network equipment, was a single sleek server unit, clearly newer than its surroundings. It hummed faintly, a sign that it was still powered, perhaps by an internal battery. This was it. David carefully connected the provided encrypted drive to the server's port. A progress bar appeared on a small integrated screen. The data transfer began, agonizingly slow. Every passing second felt like an hour. Suddenly, a faint scraping sound echoed from the far end of the facility. They froze, their breath held captive in their chests. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the scattered debris. "We're not alone," Jessica whispered, her eyes darting into the oppressive darkness. Michael gripped a rusted pipe he had picked up earlier. It could be them, the criminals checking up on us. Or someone else. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the distinct creak of metal. A flashlight beam cut through the gloom, sweeping their aisle. They ducked behind the server rack, pressing themselves against the cold metal, their hearts pounding in unison. The light paused directly on their position. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered. It wasn't one of the criminals they had encountered before. This man was dressed in dark, tactical gear, a mask obscuring his face. In his hand he held a silenced pistol. "Drop the drive," a voice, distorted by a modulator, commanded. "Leave everything and walk away." This wasn't the criminal's enforcer. This was someone else entirely. The anonymous sender? Or another faction desperate for Miller's data? David glanced at the progress bar. "Almost done." "We can't," he muttered, barely audible. The masked figure took a step closer, raising the pistol. "This is your only warning." Michael knew they were outmatched. A fight was futile, but giving up the drive meant failing the criminals and potentially incurring the wrath of the anonymous sender. They were trapped between a rock and a hard place, literally. "Who are you?" Michael demanded, trying to buy time. "Someone who understands the value of discretion," the figure replied, their voice devoid of emotion. "And someone who knows about your little secret. The one from last summer. The one Arthur Miller stumbled upon." The words hit them like a physical blow. The masked figure knew. Not just about Miller's data, but about their secret. This wasn't a random opportunist. This was someone connected, someone who knew the full scope of their predicament. Was this person the anonymous sender? Or another agent of the sender? David's eyes widened. The progress bar had just hit 100%. He quickly ejected the drive, stuffing it into his pocket. The masked figure saw the movement. Too late, they snarled and fired. The shot ripped through the air, deafening in the enclosed space. A shower of sparks erupted as the bullet ricocheted off the server rack, narrowly missing Emily's head. "Run!" Michael yelled, pushing Emily forward. They scrambled, blindly fleeing down the dark aisles, the masked figure hot on their heels. The silence of the data center was shattered by their pounding footsteps and the occasional chilling crack of another gunshot. They were no longer just retrieving data. They were fighting for their lives, caught in a deadly game where their past was merely a pawn, and their future was an increasingly bleak gamble. The anonymous note had not just opened a Pandora's box. It had unleashed a relentless hunter, and they were the prey. The data in David's pocket was their only perceived leverage, but it felt more like a ticking time bomb. They were deeper in than ever before, with no clear path out, and the true face of their tormentor remained shrouded in shadow, watching their every desperate move. That burner phone, clutched in Michael's trembling hand, felt less like a discovery and more like a carefully baited trap. It was heavy, cold, and utterly silent, its dark screen a mirror reflecting their collective fear and desperation. They gathered in David's living room once more, the late hour casting long, nervous shadows that danced with every flicker of their strained expressions. Jessica paced, a restless energy humming beneath her skin. Daniel sat rigid, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, as if daring the device to reveal its secrets. Emily huddled on the couch, lost in thought, while Sarah chewed at her lip, her gaze fixed on the phone as if expecting it to explode. "We have to open it," Michael finally stated, his voice barely a whisper. "See what's on it. It's our only chance." David, ever the pragmatist, nodded grimly. "It's probably locked. Or wiped. But I'll try." He took the phone, his fingers moving with practiced precision, a stark contrast to the chaotic emotions swirling around them. Hours passed in agonizing silence, punctuated only by the soft clicks of David's keyboard as he connected the burner to his laptop, running diagnostics, attempting to bypass its security. The air grew thick with anticipation, each tick of the grandfather clock in the corner amplifying their anxiety. Then a sudden triumphant gasp from David. "Got it." It's incredibly basic. Almost empty. Their heads snapped towards him, a surge of adrenaline momentarily eclipsing their exhaustion. "What's on it?" Jessica demanded, her voice sharp. David scrolled through the sparse files. "Almost nothing. A few system files and two things. A single image file. And an audio recording." He projected the image onto the large screen of his monitor. It was an old, slightly blurry photograph, clearly taken years ago. In it, a younger Mark Miller stood, smiling broadly, arm around another person. This person was unfamiliar to all of them. A man with sharp features and an intense gaze, a subtle scar visible above his left eyebrow. He wasn't smiling in the photo, not really. His expression was more of a knowing smirk, a forced pleasantness that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Who is that?" Emily whispered, her brow furrowed. None of them recognized him. He wasn't part of their high school crowd, nor anyone they remembered Mark socializing with in their immediate circle. The image offered no immediate answers, only another layer of mystery. Next, David clicked on the audio file. A crackle, then Mark Miller's voice, younger, more carefree than they remembered, but with an underlying tension they hadn't noticed at the time. "Hey, it's Mark. Look, things are getting messy. Someone's sniffing around, asking too many questions about, I think they're onto us. If anything happens to me, you know who to look for. Don't let them get away with it." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving a void of silence in the room that felt heavier than any sound. They stared at each other, a chilling realization dawning. Mark's words weren't about them. They weren't about the accident. They were about something else. Someone sniffing around, asking too many questions about, what did Mark mean by, And who was he talking to? The implications were staggering. Mark had a secret life, a hidden conflict, that had nothing to do with their hit and run. Before they could even begin to process this new, disturbing information, the world outside their clandestine meeting began to unravel. Within hours of accessing the burner phone, a new wave of attacks began, far more targeted and public than anything before. First, an anonymous email was sent to the board of directors at the prestigious law firm where Daniel worked, subtly hinting at ethical improprieties and a history of reckless behavior vague enough to be untraceable, but damaging enough to trigger an internal investigation. Daniel was immediately placed on administrative leave, his career hanging by a thread. Then, a local gossip blog, usually reserved for minor celebrity sightings, ran a blind item about a prominent architect in the city, clearly referencing Michael and his questionable financial dealings related to a recent high-profile project. The article was filled with innuendo and thinly veiled accusations of bribery and cutting corners, enough to send shockwaves through Michael's professional network. His phone began ringing incessantly, his reputation already taking a significant hit. Emily found her meticulously curated social media presence under siege. Old, innocuous photos were dug up and recaptioned with malicious, fabricated stories, painting her as manipulative and deceitful. Her art gallery, which had just started gaining traction, received a flurry of one-star reviews, all citing her dubious character and unethical practices. Jessica, whose burgeoning career as an investigative journalist was her everything, suddenly found her most sensitive sources going silent. A major story she was working on, almost at publication, abruptly hit a wall as key informants backed out, citing unforeseen circumstances and a chilling reluctance to speak with her. It was clear someone was actively sabotaging her network, systematically cutting off her access to information. Sarah, who had been trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, received an anonymous package at her home. Inside, there was nothing but a single pristine white lily, a flower traditionally associated with death and funerals. It was a silent, chilling reminder that she was being watched, that her home was not safe. The group's carefully constructed lives began to crumble around them, not because of direct accusations related to Mark Miller, but through a systematic, insidious campaign of character assassination and sabotage. This wasn't just about, "I know what you did last summer" anymore. It was about destroying their present and future. The tormentor had escalated from veiled threats to active, public destruction, proving their reach was far wider and their intent far more malicious than they had ever imagined. Panic set in. Accusations flew around David's living room like poisoned darts. "It's Daniel. He's always been too quiet, too calculating," Jessica hissed, her face pale with fury. "He probably thought he could use this whole situation to his advantage, pin it on us and come out clean." Daniel scoffed, his eyes blazing. "Me? What about you, Jessica? Always digging, always looking for a scoop. Maybe you tried to expose this whole thing yourself and it backfired. Or maybe you're working with them. Don't be ridiculous." Michael interjected, trying to mediate, but his own voice was laced with desperation. "This is insane. We're turning on each other, exactly what they want." He looked at Emily, then Sarah. "Someone here has to know something or have done something else that could link us to this person, this other secret Mark had." Emily, tears welling in her eyes, shook her head vehemently. "I swear I have no idea. I barely knew Mark outside of our group. What other secret could he have had?" Sarah, clutching her chest, could only stammer, "The lily, it means they know where I live. They're inside our lives." Amidst the chaos and the unraveling trust, Michael's mind raced, replaying Mark's recorded words, staring at the blurry photograph of Mark and the unknown man. Someone sniffing around, asking too many questions about, and the man in the photo with his intense, unsmiling gaze. Michael had a sudden jarring memory, a fleeting image from years ago, buried under layers of time and trauma. He remembered a minor news story, a local article that had barely registered with him at the time, about 6 months before Mark's death. It was about a small underground poker ring that had been busted in a neighboring town. Mark Miller's name had been mentioned, not as a player, but as someone who had been present, questioned, and then released. The article had quickly faded from public memory, overshadowed by bigger headlines. He dismissed it then, thinking it was just Mark being Mark, always dabbling in risky ventures. But now, looking at the man in the photo, the pieces began to click into place, a horrifying mosaic forming in his mind. The scar above the eyebrow, the intense gaze. Michael remembered seeing a mugshot in that old article, a blurry image of one of the ringleaders, and a description of his distinguishing features. It wasn't perfect, but the resemblance, the scar, the intensity, it was too close to ignore. "The poker ring," Michael breathed, his voice barely audible above the rising panic. Mark was involved in some shady poker games. 6 months before the accident, there was a bust. I remember seeing an article, a small one. He was questioned. "And I think this man, he pointed at the photo, was connected to it. He frantically searched on David's laptop, digging through old digital archives of local newspapers. It took him 20 agonizing minutes, but he found it. A grainy article dated 8 years prior, detailing the bust of an illegal gambling operation. And there, among the list of individuals questioned, was Mark Miller. And pictured prominently as one of the alleged ringleaders, was the man from the burner phone photo. His name was Arthur Hayes. Arthur Hayes. Michael remembered the article mentioning that Hayes had been released due to lack of sufficient evidence, but that he had lost a significant amount of money and reputation in the process, and there were rumors he suspected someone within his own circle of tipping off the authorities. Mark Miller, being present, would have been a prime suspect for someone like Arthur Hayes. "This isn't just about the accident," Michael announced, his voice now ringing with a terrifying clarity. "It's about this. Mark was involved in something else, something dangerous. And this man, Arthur Hayes, he lost everything because of it. He must have believed Mark betrayed him, or was somehow responsible for the bust. Mark's message, someone sniffing around, it wasn't about us. It was about Arthur Hayes or someone like him, getting close to his secrets." The room fell into a stunned silence. The implication was horrific. Their anonymous tormentor wasn't just seeking justice for a hit and run. They were seeking revenge for a much deeper, more personal betrayal, using the accident as leverage, as a convenient tool to destroy the lives of everyone connected to Mark Miller. The hit and run was just the catalyst, the spark that ignited a much older, more dangerous vendetta. Just as this chilling realization washed over them, David's phone, which had been silent for hours, buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from an unknown number. He opened it, and the words glowed ominously on the screen, visible to all of them. "You found his ghost. Now you'll find mine. The game has just begun." The phone clattered to the floor, the screen still broadcasting the chilling message. Silence, heavier and colder than the ocean air outside, descended upon the room. Michael's face was ashen. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. David stared at the fallen device as if it were a venomous snake, while Emily let out a strangled gasp, burying her face in her hands. Detective Miller, who had been observing their strained confession with a stoic expression, moved swiftly. He picked up the phone, his gaze scanning the text. His brow furrowed. "An unknown number," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "And unlike the previous notes, this isn't a physical message. This is direct. What does it mean?" Emily sobbed, her voice muffled. "We told you everything. We found Mark's ghost. What other ghost is there?" "It means," the detective said, his voice low and steady, "that someone else knows. Someone who has been watching. Someone who perhaps orchestrated this entire charade to get you to confess." He looked at each of them, his gaze piercing. "And they're not done." Michael finally found his voice, a ragged whisper. "But who? Who else could know? We swore each other to secrecy. No one else was there." "Are you absolutely certain?" Miller pressed. "Think back. Did anyone ever suspect? A loose word? A strange look from someone?" Jessica shook her head frantically. "No, never. We were so careful. Careful enough to cover up a death for years," Miller pointed out, his tone devoid of judgment, just fact. "But perhaps not careful enough to hide your guilt from an observant eye." He pulled out his own phone, already dialing. "We need to trace this number. Immediately." Hours blurred into a tense waiting game. The police station, usually a place of answers, felt like a cage of questions. The initial relief of having confessed had evaporated, replaced by a new, insidious fear. "The game has just begun" echoed in their minds, a promise of continued torment. Finally, Detective Miller returned, his expression grim. "The number's a burner phone, untraceable in the conventional sense. However, we've cross-referenced cell tower data. The signal originated from several locations over the past few days, all within a 5-mile radius of your old coastal town. And one particular location stands out." He paused, letting the suspense build. "The old lighthouse." A collective shiver ran through the group. The abandoned lighthouse, perched precariously on the cliffs, had been a childhood haunt, a place of dares and whispered secrets. It was also the closest landmark to where they had buried Mark. "Why the lighthouse?" David asked, his voice barely audible. "It's a vantage point," Miller replied. "Someone could have been watching you that night. watching your attempts to forget, watching your lives unfold. He then looked directly at Michael. Do you remember the notes? The handwriting? Michael nodded slowly. Yes, it was neat. Almost formal. We found something, Miller continued, producing a clear plastic bag containing a small leather-bound journal. It was found hidden in the old lighthouse keeper's cottage, tucked away in a loose floorboard. The handwriting inside matches the notes you received. He opened the journal to a marked page. This journal belongs to a Sarah Reynolds, Mark Reynolds' younger sister. The name hit them like a physical blow. Sarah, Mark's quiet, observant little sister. They remembered her as a shy, bookish girl, always in Mark's shadow, clutching a worn copy of some fantasy novel. She would have been around 10 or 11 that summer. Too young to be involved, surely. Sarah, Emily whispered, her eyes wide with dawning horror. But she was just a kid. Kids observe more than you think, Miller countered. Especially when they're grieving. Especially when they feel a profound sense of injustice. He flipped through the journal. Her entries detail her brother's life, his struggles, and then, after his disappearance, her growing suspicion. She writes about the group's strange behavior, the hushed conversations, the way you all seemed to move on while her family was shattered. He read aloud a passage, his voice flat. They pretend he just ran away. They pretend they don't know. But I see it in their eyes. The guilt, the fear. They buried him, not just in the ground but in their silence. They buried me too with their lies. I am a ghost just like Mark. But I will not be silent forever. The air crackled with the weight of revelation. Sarah. All these years she had been watching, waiting, meticulously planning her revenge. Her ghost was the one they had ignored. The one whose grief had festered into a cold, calculated fury. She blames us, Jessica mumbled, tears streaming down her face. For everything. She believes you were responsible for more than just a cover-up, Miller clarified, his eyes scanning another page. She writes about Mark being bullied, about feeling isolated. She specifically mentions instances involving some of you. He looked pointedly at Michael and David. She suggests the accident on the cliff was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of prolonged torment. Michael and David flinched, remembering the casual jabs, the relentless teasing, the way they had often pushed Mark to his limits, sometimes playfully, sometimes not. It wasn't physical abuse, not exactly, but it was a constant chipping away at his confidence, a subtle cruelty that had become normalized. They had dismissed it as typical teenage banter, never truly realizing the impact. She knew, David breathed, his face contorting in shame. She must have seen us, heard us. Miller nodded slowly. She knew Mark was struggling, and she believes your actions that night, regardless of intent, were the final blow. She didn't just want you to confess to the cover-up. She wanted you to confront the truth of what you did to her brother. The full, ugly truth. Where is she now? Emily asked, her voice trembling. The last entry in the journal is dated yesterday. It reads, "The game has begun. They will find his ghost. Then they will find mine. And then they will finally know what it feels like to be haunted." Just then, a uniformed officer entered the room, looking flustered. "Detective, we have a situation." A 911 call from the old lighthouse. A woman, matching Sarah Reynolds' description, is up on the observation deck. She's threatening to jump. Panic seized the group. This wasn't just about their past anymore. It was about preventing another tragedy. They raced to the lighthouse, the wailing sirens cutting through the night. The old structure loomed against the stormy sky, its beacon dark. At the very top, silhouetted against the churning clouds, was a lone figure. Sarah. Police had already cordoned off the area. Detective Miller, along with a crisis negotiator, began speaking through a megaphone, trying to coax her down. The group stood at the base, their hearts pounding. This was it. The culmination of years of secrets, of guilt, of a hidden life. Suddenly, Sarah's voice, amplified by the wind, carried down to them, clear and sharp. "You came. You finally came to see my ghost." Her eyes, even from that distance, seemed to fix on them. "You thought you could bury him and forget. You thought you could live your perfect lives while we mourned. But I never forgot. I watched you. I watched you laugh, I watched you celebrate, while Mark was just a whisper in the wind." "Sarah, please," Miller's voice boomed. "No one wants to hurt you. We just want to talk." "Talk?" she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You had years to talk, years to tell the truth. But you were too busy protecting yourselves, weren't you? Her gaze swept over Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily. You pushed him. You broke him down day after day. And that night you pushed him too far. And then you just left him. The negotiator tried again, calmly, professionally. But Sarah seemed oblivious, lost in her own tormented narrative. I saw you that night, she continued, her voice rising in intensity. I followed Mark. I saw you surround him. I saw Michael push him hard. I saw him stumble right on the edge. You thought no one saw, but I did. I was hidden in the rocks just below. I saw everything. Michael gasped, a strangled sound of disbelief and horror. He remembered the shove, yes, but he had convinced himself it was an accident, a reflex. But Sarah's words painted a different, darker picture. A deliberate, aggressive shove. You buried him, and then you buried my testimony, Sarah cried out, her voice cracking with pain. They wouldn't listen to a scared little girl. They said I was imagining things, that I was just grieving. So I became a ghost. Silent. Invisible. Until now. The wind whipped her hair around her face. She wasn't threatening to jump. She was delivering her final, devastating confession. Her revenge wasn't about ending her life. It was about exposing theirs. You found his ghost, she repeated, her voice echoing across the choppy waves. Now you found mine, and you'll carry us both forever. With a final chilling glare, she turned, not towards the edge, but towards a small, hidden door on the side of the observation deck, a maintenance access they had never noticed. She slipped inside, disappearing from view. Officers rushed up the winding stairs, but by the time they reached the top, Sarah was gone. The door led to a series of old, disused tunnels beneath the lighthouse, a labyrinth known only to a few. She had planned her escape as meticulously as she had planned her revenge. Detective Miller returned to the group, his face grim. She left behind a package, a USB drive. It contains everything. Her journal entries, recordings of your conversations she managed to capture over the years, even a detailed map of where Mark's remains were buried, corroborating your confession. He held up the small drive. And something else. A final note. He read it aloud. The game is not over. It has just begun. Because now, you don't just live with a secret. You live with the truth. And the world will know it too. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah hadn't sought to end their lives, but to dismantle them. She had played the long game. A master manipulator, using their guilt as her weapon. The anonymous notes, the escalating fear, the carefully orchestrated confession. It was all her design. The group stood there exposed, shattered. Their secret was out. Not just to the police, but to the world, through Sarah's carefully curated evidence. The legal consequences would be severe. But the psychological ones, the haunting truth of what they had truly done, would be far worse. They had found Mark's ghost, and now Sarah's. And as she promised, they would carry them both every single day, for the rest of their lives. The game had indeed just begun, and they were the ones who would spend forever paying the price.